Hello and welcome to Prime Time Sunday. My name is Dennis Jar and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In our broadcast tonight, we're going to be discussing who owns the land. We're going to be looking at Liberia's boundaries and land ownership, land issues. To discuss, I have my guest, Dr. Emmanuel Ure. Dr. Ure, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you very much, Dennis. It's good to be here. I enjoy being on focus on Liberia all the time. So, I look forward to good discussion with my sister called Formula.
Dr. Ure is a PhD in environment and resources. He contributed to the passage of the Liberian Land Rights Act. So you should understand why he's here tonight. Next, I have our sister, Mrs. Carl Famula. Carl, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good to be here with my old friend Emmanuel, former colleague, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And by the way, Carl is a public policy professional. He's the former UNDP technical consultant to the Liberia Land Commission. So you see, I have all the right people. So let's do this. The issue of land. You know, the background there is start all the way back before the land issues we have today. Our land ownership. How do we own land? But what's the history? We want to put some things in context to be able to understand fully the today realities regarding land ownership. And land is a very important thing, right? Land. I mean, think about it. Land. In my village, they call it bro. Dr. Ure, how you call it in your hometown?
Yes, in Gomu, and which is a little Pele village in Bon County, very close to the Guinea border. It's called Loy. Loy in Pele means the land. It's very important. That word, like, is very important. We can talk about it.
It's important. And when I was growing up, we used to hear something like, because land was always an issue. Sometimes they accuse one group and say, oh, this person is selling the land. So you will hear, oh, brosle. Brosle means land palava. So brosle, because bro is land, and that slave was always. Carl, let me go to you. What are you? I don't want Concord Town manner. If you have money from
I have not mastered my dialect enough to share to put you in here in front of your guests. So I beg you.
Yeah, but I have my manual I learned from Guinea. I will help you. So let's try.
Okay, please do. How do you say learn in Mano?
Okay, we want to call on all those that are watching us. Tell us the word for land in your language. It could be any Liberian language or any language that you know, because land is very important and we want to stress that enough. So let's talk about bro. Let's talk about loy. Let's talk about slang. Right? All right. So let's put this in context. Let me have your opening statement. Let's start with Carl.
So, first of all, I know that Emmanuel is going to do his presentation, so I don't want to talk too much about, history, but it's important for us to know the background of how we became able to even have discussions and even possess our land as we do today. The story of Liberia is a story of a quest for people who were disenfranchised globally to be able to hold on to sovereignty. And sovereignty, political sovereignty, is tied to land. Without land, there is no political sovereignty. Without land, there is no state. Without land, there is no country. And so the story of our land and our land rights is a story of our citizenship and our ownership rights. All those things are intertwined. You cannot be a country without land, and you cannot be a citizen without land rights. It's extremely important. The two things, how they're tied intricately, and you cannot divorce one from the other. So people who are landless and have no rights to land are not fully enfranchised in their political process, in the control of their country and destiny. And at the same time, if a country does not have control of its land, the country is not really sovereign. So I want us to keep this in mind as we go through this discussion when Emmanuel presents his historical context and how we were able to maintain land and sovereignty. It's extremely important.
Thank you. And we'll go to Emmanuel a bit. For the month of February, we went through, Liberian history as part of the Black History Month, because we say Liberian history is Black history. So this show tonight is a bonus for the whole month of February, the history that we talk about. And that's why we are ending it with land, which is a very, very important piece of who we are as a people. So we'll invite Dr. Ure, the ones whose fingerprint is on the Land Rights Act. And again, he's a postdoctoral research assistant at the University of Wisconsin and former president of the Liberian Association of Wisconsin. So he knows a lot about land, because land is Dr. Ure. And you have first, welcome to the show, and your introduction and the background of this whole idea of land issues in Liberia.
Once again, Dennis, thank you very much for what you do and what Focus on Liberia does for our country. It's very, very important. Education, knowledge is power. I want to say thank you very much to call for teaming up with me to discuss a very important issue. I stated land is everything we have. From the biblical days of old, when God is sending Abraham to that land, the land I'm going to promise you, to the people of Canaan, or coming down to Greek city state, the Roman Empire, or modern day the United States, the conquering of what we call the New World. Everything is bordered on land. And when people were enslaved and they were free and they could not get a place to stay, they have to go somewhere else to look for land and the area where their ancestors came from, which eventually became Liberia. So land is important. The other day I said on one other show that we are the land. Without the land, we cannot exist as a people. So sometimes people are just depending on the economic value they extract for land. Land is actually more than just economic value. There's a cultural value to land. Our heritage, where my neighbor stream is buried. In Pele, we say log. When we say log, it's very, very important. And one who does anything ugly on the land will pay the ultimate price, because the land is the mother nature upon which we survive as a people everywhere, in every culture. So I'm happy that we're talking about land today. Thank you.
All right. Let's go to the historical context, and we call again Dr. Ure. Go ahead.
Well, this presentation is focusing basically on the territorial limits of Liberia. The land we have today now, we call Liberia. It has boundary. It's stretching on the Atlantic Ocean, and then it's bordered the Republic of Guinea, the Republic of Sierra Leone, and the Republic of Ivory Coast. So we want to talk about the struggle that our forefathers went through to preserve what we have today, and how Liberia has survived as a nation up to this point. That's what the presentation is all about. Are we sharing the screen? We can move to the next slide. I'm going to run through it very shortly. I don't know why is the presentation, the rest of it is not coming. If not, I'm going to try to share it I'm going to try to go through it from my screen, because there are a lot of writing that's supposed to be on the right side of the screen. I'm not seeing that show up. So
yeah, we're making that adjustment, and we're gonna put that on the screen.
Okay. In the meantime, I can keep talking. When you are ready, you let me know.
All right.
Because we are time conscious. We will go through. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can divide the territorial boundaries of Liberia, but not just Liberia, actually, the rest of Africa into different sections. We have the pre-colonial foundations. During this time, land boundaries were not tightly controlled. So people live everywhere. The Africans, they live in kingdom, by clan, by tribes, various settlements. And so the control was focused on the center, right? There was a center of control where the king and his kingsmen live, and where to protect. They were more interested in in protecting the trade route and also control over people and resources. At the time, expansion was very hard because the forest was dense. To penetrate the forest was quite difficult. There were lions, there were different kind of animals. It was very difficult. So we see that the periphery of what could be a kingdom or an empire was loosely organized. Okay, that's really the kind of background upon which Liberia became a country. So people were loosely organized, different king, different kingdom, strong political will in certain areas. Then we can move quickly to the colonial period. And this colonial period here, this is the point at which uh, treaties are signed by with kings. All right. So this is a European signing a treaty or by conquest, direct force capturing a territory. This is the colonial period. And this period is coming later because Liberia had actually established in 1821, 1822, in 1847, had already declared it independent as the only lone state in the whole of what was referred to as the Dark Continent. This is the time. So this colonial period, wherein boundaries are established by rivers, by natural features, and different kind of geographical features on the land. All right, this is the time, and this time, these boundaries are also very loosely organized. It cut across cultural boundaries, right? Cultural boundaries. We're talking about establishing physical boundaries, cutting across cultural boundaries. So, take for instance, today we have the Pele in Guinea, we have the Pele in Liberia, right? The boundaries we have as a physical between Liberia and Guinea is a physical boundary. It's not a cultural boundary. If it's a cultural boundary, it will extend all the way to Kakata and all the way to Gigetu, because that's the entire Pele region. All right. So then we move to the independent period. Okay. Boundaries of colonial rule accepted as boundary of independent states. So when African countries started to gain independence in the 1960s, we'll talk about Liberia later. We see that the colonial powers, their physical boundaries they are drawn at that time will eventually become the boundary for the independent state. We're not just talking about Liberia, we're talking about Africa in general. I fear that if you want to establish your cultural boundaries, there will be a lot of political instabilities.
Yeah.
That's the background. Upon that background, we can move quickly to Liberia and talk about Liberia. We can summarize the history of Liberia establishment from 1822 to 1847. The country has gained its independence. And right after independence, President Robert had traveled to Great Britain and negotiated and got some money, paid for this area in present-day Sierra Leone called the Galenas, because the Galena area was very, very important. Why? It threatened Liberia independence, because this area, active slave trading was still ongoing. For the government of Liberia to control this area, they needed to have full control. So President Robert, under his influence, they purchased that entire area and suppressed the slave trading in that area, which eventually the trade in slavery began to be replaced with a trade in palm oil and other products from the interior of Liberia. Something happened within that time. Just within that time, there was some British officers were in that area also carrying on trading. They refused to pay taxes to the Liberian government under the influence of the colonial master from Sierra Leone. There's a whole negotiation that went on. Eventually, Great Britain forced Liberia to give the Ghanaians in 1882. All right. So the area was taken from Liberia, and which very, very, very important. To lose that to lose that land, it was pitiful for Liberia, but it was done under duress. Then on the the northeastern part, that is the side where eventually became French Guinea and the Ivory Coast. The French, they learned from that experience the fact that Great Britain was successful in seizing, annexing the land from Liberia. It became a lesson to them they could capitalize on. For too long, these world powers have been at loggerheads. They have been really opposing forces. in the global community. So to say that Great Britain was inclusion on Liberia, France too emulate the same thing and started to seize that land from Liberia as well. All right. So they were in 1846. Maryland had purchased land up to the San Pedro River in Ivory Coast and had brought the land under the colonate or the Republic of Maryland in Africa. Eventually, Maryland would become part of Liberia in 1857, and that land eventually became part of Liberia. Again, through forceful negotiation, through pressure from France, France was able to seize the land in about 1891. And this came after the Berlin Conference because the conference had changed the nature of territorial occupation. Before them, you could occupy a territory by signing treaties. From the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, it was changed that your military presence had to be felt in that area. And Liberia was very weak, and we can talk about the challenges Liberia faced. I don't know what are we back now on the screen. There's a map I wanted to show so that I can give some space to call to talk on some of these things I'm talking about. But this last map here, I want our viewer to see it. It's important because you see the current day Liberia, this boundary finally negotiated in the 1920s and finally demarcated since gaining independence in 1847. That's the white here you see in the map. But then if you look at the key of the map, you'll notice something. You'll see A. To Sierra Leone in 1883 to 1885, you see the A here. That's the Ghanaian territory I was talking about. All right. So that one was seized to Sierra Leone. The British forcefully took it from Liberia. Then you see that in B, you see Ivory Coast in 1892. And on the map, we can look carefully and see, okay, this is the side of the far eastern part of Liberia, the San Pedro River. You can see that area was also taken by Ivory Coast. Then there was a negotiation somewhere in between that C, Sierra Leone, in exchange for D. This C area here, this is another area in 1907 that was heavily contested. Liberia had gained this area, and it was a very populated area, a very resourceful area. The straight route could lead from there directly to the Galena area. But the British, the British seized the area, and then eventually in exchange for D, this little area, depopulated area to Liberia to strengthen Liberia border. Then we can look at the rest of it now, which is E and F. These are all seized to France. The French using their power to negotiate to take these pieces of land from Liberia. The point I'm making here is that the land taken from Liberia was significant. You can see it physically on the map that it was a significant land. However, it was not like Liberia did not want to do it, but we can talk about the challenges the country faced at the time, and which the country is still facing today. However, we are very grateful to those that were leading this effort. At least they fought hard with both internal and external pressure for us to have what we call the Republic of Liberia, whose this country then stood the Lone Star on the United Nations that will eventually be the redemption of the African continent from colonial masters. Let me leave here now. Let me stop it here and see what we can get. We can come back to you, Dennis, for
right. Thank you so much for that. Beautiful background. I see Cole was nodding at every word. So, but it's very important that you give that context because looking at what we have today, sometimes we don't have the appreciation of what was done in the past because we're looking at history, backwards, thinking that it's today. But people have to struggle. Imagine there was no social media. There was a time there was no even military in Liberia. In fact, that's why the frontier force was established to look at this. So in the midst of this, you have these colonial powers encroaching on the land. And see, when I look at B, and I see B, what you show there, the San Pedro area, those who have been there say it's all, I mean, you could see the cultural similarities between the Gribbles on the other side of the Kavala And I also saw that when you go to from Ikepa, you cross to Bosu in Guinea, also from Ganta on the border there. So you can see it's all Liberia, but we have what we have today. Call.
Yeah, so Emmanuel, that was brilliant, brilliant synopsis. I think for people who don't have the background understanding boundary delineation and things in Liberia, that was very, very useful. I want to add um, the reason Liberia extended so far into the hinterland was not because the settlers had control over the people or the territories, the kingdoms and nations that existed there. It was because at the time, the rivers and their sources were the demarcation for territory. It, for many reasons, military reasons, safety reasons, you should always be in charge of the headwaters of your rivers that run through your nation. Otherwise, if the headwaters of your rivers fall into foreign territory, they can cut off your fresh water supply by simply building a dam. So it was normal for them to follow the St. Paul River all the way to Musadu in those days, right? Because at the top of the St. Paul River, which was somewhere in modern day Zerekuri, would have been the headwaters up there in the mountains, those northern mountains. And that's why the territory stretched so far. Some of the reason that it was so important for them to conquer Zerekuri and remove that portion away from Liberia was because they wanted to, in an event that they needed to starve Liberia, they could cut these rivers off. I mean, this is how just devious and malicious these people were. So you have a situation where Europe is wanting to shift chattel slavery away from extracting human beings from the continent of Africa. They are now focused on, we can enslave them right where they are and use them on the land that they exist in to extract resources for the benefit and the wealth development of European countries in North America. So what do? They come together and decide they're going to divide Africa. And they have the idea that Africans, because we were essentially, this is the 1800s, we were still enslaved in most parts of the world. So Africans were not considered people that should own land. Liberia stood as an absolute testament against everything Western imperialism stood for. Here is a country governed by Black people who say they are in their ancestral land, identify themselves as Africans, standing up sovereign and governing themselves and owning land and reading and writing and practicing law and defending themselves in international court. This was a threat to colonialism. This was amazing. So they could not allow Liberia to be what it was intended to be, because it would not be able to achieve their goal of subjugating Africans, who they did not believe had a right to land ownership or to own the resources, that these Africans needed to be controlled. So if you read some of the arguments that these people were making in courts in Europe against Liberia, was, oh, they don't have any control over the indigenous people in their hinterlands. We need to take this place because the indigenous people are still there. You know, I mean, it was crazy. So I want to say something. There's a book, a report really, called "So Who Owns the Land? Who Owns the Forest?" And in that, it's called "So Who Owns the Forest?" And it was written by Liz Wiley. She was a PhD candidate at the time. She did her research in Liberia. One of the things that she said in her report, which is obvious to me, but a lot of people don't see it this way, because they think that the settlers, the ACS, the immigrants, the African returnees were basically colonialists, and they were not. What she says in her report is, she says, unlike their British, French, Portuguese, German, and Belgian counterparts, the governing colonization societies of these immigrants did not simply help themselves to the lands of the Africans they encountered. Instead, the early society acknowledged the Africans They acknowledged that the Africa they arrived in was far from empty of owners, and that they instead, every land was owned by communities. Each of these discrete territories was known, by boundaries. Basically she was saying is they recognized that the Africans, which is so silly for me to have to say this, but at that time period, we were not considered full-fledged human beings with the right to ownership of property, because in many cases we ourselves were considered property. So the settlers recognized and even wrote into the 1847 Constitution some protections for the land sovereignty, or the territory of the indigenous people that were within the Liberian territory. So this is the only case in the entire continent of Africa where this has ever happened. And it is because Liberia was settled by former slaves who knew that they were also Africans. If they were to deny the humanity of the people they met, it would be denying their own humanity. So the incredible fight for Liberia to remain a country was also a fight that would also topple colonialism later. Yeah. They could not allow Liberia to be successful, because if Liberia was successful, they would fail in their conquest of Africa, because they would stand as example to others.
Right. Thank you. And it's important you said that about the origin or the type of the rivers, right? Mm-hmm. Because I was in Guinea, and in Bosu right there, you see where the St. John River began, and you can literally jump over it. So it makes sense to me that someone would like to take that place and cut it off. But then if you go around Jacob, district number 2 in Grand Bazaar, the St. Paul River the St. John is almost like a sea. I mean, if you see people, it's so huge. So it makes sense that someone want to cut it off. But that was the boundary, right? So the colonial happens, things happen, and we have what we have now. But let's just look at a little bit of the land acquisition and ownership when the settlers first arrived at Cape Masurado. Let's just spend like 2 minutes on that one, and then we go to present day, because the way land was acquired when the ex-slaves returned through around Cape Masurado, whether it have any impact on the way we own land today or the way land is owned and bought or sold in Liberia today. So let's do a little bit of history on the history of acquisition and settlement of around Cape Masurado especially, but let's include Cape Mount, Cape Masurado, and Cape Palmas.
So I think it's a very important question. Like I said, the settlers did recognize the indigenous land ownership. So in more instances, they acquire land either through a form of negotiation. Sometimes this area, there was still a lot of active slave trading going on. If you read the account of Joey Asmon and other people in the 1830s, they clearly tell you the amount of struggle they were going through, right? It was not, I look at Liberia like a surviving country, right? A country that had gone through ups and downs, but its people are resilient. So some of us who know the history, we look at Liberia using different lens than just to sit and condemn the country. The country has faced a lot of difficulties. Land was given to families as they arrive, single family or multiple family, 25 acres, a town lot, 25 acres for family. Depending on the development they carry on the land, they were given more land. One thing that had cut across up to present day today, that history, what we face in Monrovia, wherein sometimes you buy land, they're asking you to develop it. A border on several things. Sometimes fraudulent land sellers are actually doing it because they want you to protect it by putting development on it. But that development has a history. The history is at the time you actually needed to do some investment to really retain that land, at least honor the Liberian government, and which was quite different from indigenous people. Indigenous people, they carry on development. Their form of development was perhaps misunderstood. It was a form of development. They carry on sweating cultivation. They cultivate here and let that land for the next 20 years before they come back to it. The land would again its fertility. It's different. Then you say you have to make some sort of cash development. So one thing really that early on that started and with some of the in fact some of the tribal war, the settlers versus the indigenous clashes, it was about land. And it was about the different conception of land. Why the settlers recognized land ownership? Their recognition was in under the influence of private ownership, Western form of land. Nobody can blame them because they were Americans. They were just black Americans. That's the only thing. After you've been in slavery or you gain your freedom for the last 300 years, physically you don't know anything of Africa, right? So they were Africans, and so we see a different meaning of land from the African perspective and from the settlers, and we see some of the conflict initially taking place, and some of the conflict that really hurt the Republic of Liberia. This was internal struggle against the indigenous people, plus what Cole already articulated from the outside forces, the external pressure. So the small government weak without resources, there is internal conflict. There is also external pressure of a group of people that consider you to be inferior. So some of the things I just really brought the history of the Ghanaians and all the map, the areas I showed. When you go in detail, you really pity Liberia. Because in more instances, Liberia looked to the United States. Sometimes the US helped, but the help was not enough. If the US were really helping the way they should have done it, would I not done away with all the land? So in more instances, the country was very pressure to giving the land out. But this is how far we are. Liberia struggled through ups and downs.
And Cole, if you can add a little bit on because we read from
Yeah. So one of the things that has happened that I think that we don't really like to talk about. We talk about these conflicts over land. There was an issue. I don't know if you all are familiar with Lomax and Cooper. The story of Willie Cooper and Lomax, who were in the what is now Baupulu, which was considered the western boundary with the Anglo-Liberian boundary. They had a conflict there with the frontier forces, and the British had incited, and they did this many times. They did this against the Republic of Maryland with the Grable chiefs. They did this a lot of times. A lot of slave dealers, like Pedro Blanco would arm and incite people against the Republic of Liberia because they were abolitionists or whatever the case. So a lot of times we had conflicts among ourselves as Liberians between the indigenous and the Republic that were incited, sponsored by our external enemies. So the situation, the story of Lomax and Cooper and the 8 Bandi leaders who were executed on the battlefield. And it's a whole legendary story in Liberian history. But this was a prime example where the British had incited Bandi people living within the confines of the Liberian territory against the Liberian government, armed them against the frontier forces. And they acted as saboteurs, or you would say traitors. They didn't consider themselves Liberians. Liberians considered them to be Liberians, right? The Liberian government said, you're in our territory, you're Liberian. They said they're not Liberian. The British armed them against Liberians. At the end of the day, Lomax and Cooper had them executed on the battlefront. That land today is Sierra Leone. The descendants of those people, the Bandi people that are now in Sierra Leone, they are landless. They don't own property, they don't own land. It's the same thing with even Ivory Coast border. We have had situations where they use certain indigenous clans against the Liberian government. So it's not that it just came and took by force. They use our own people to fight against our own collective interests because we didn't understand the greater picture. And then the descendants of those people are today living in places like San Pedro. There's today living in places like, Bo on the other side, or Zimi, or all these other places in Sierra Leone and Guinea. And those people were subject to colonialism. A lot of the land that they were sitting on is now in the hands of great, French companies that are doing big agricultural projects. They don't even have access to farm anything. They have to creep into, Maryland County. They have to creep into our territory just to grow vegetables. A lot of times in the southeast, and even the case with Sierra Leoneans, a lot of times have to come into Liberia just to hunt, just to be free. So the history of how they did it was not only by military force, but by playing a game of divide and conquer. Right. And inciting us against our own interests, taking this other group against this other group. And it's documented, if you read a lot of the British journals, the primary source documents from that time period, you will be sick to your stomach at the extent they went through to fight Liberia. And they documented these things, so it wasn't even like, oh, it's just a rumor. No, these people went in and gave our own indigenous people weapons and turned those weapons against themselves. They unknowingly were fighting against their own future and their own children. It could have been disastrous, and we probably should be speaking French, or we should be speaking Sierra Leonean Creole right now, because the efforts to take this country down were so intense that they were using not only blatant force, but coercion, manipulation. They were doing divide and conquer. They were inciting. They were doing so many things. And so the war against Liberia was multifaceted.
Yeah.
And somehow we survived those things, and then we still exist. That is a miracle by itself.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing land ownership in Liberia. My guest, Dr. Emmanuel K. Ure Yapalo, and Carl family. We've gone through the background and see why this whole land issue is important, the role the colonial masters played, and even the settlers, their understanding of land ownership in Liberia and how it's affected us, or how it is in play today. That takes us to our next topic, which is actually the land ownership. And Dr. Ure, you started that already, that there was a Western concept of the way they look at land ownership. They didn't have the Liberian way of owning land. So let's look at land ownership. Let's discuss the private land, the public land, all the 9 yards.
Yes. So that comes to the history of the land itself within the territorial limit of what we have in Liberia now. We're talking about the one that we lost to the French and the British, and the reason why we did that. But let's come to the one we have. The one we have now, as I said from the beginning, there was a different concept of land ownership from the Liberian government and that of the indigenous people, the tribal people. Land was pretty much nationalized. Two categories of land ownership. It either be government land or private land, basically. Meaning, if a land was never purchased from the government, with the president of Liberia being the initial grantor, whoever purchased that land went on to sell, to subdivide his land or her land as private land. The land was considered to be public land, eventually government land. Because of that, the Liberian government then could, grant large-scale concession agreement. We can talk about the politics of the first major one, which is Firestone. Everyone knows about Firestone. We can talk about the politics in there, about Firestone taking that land, occupied by Bassa people and Pella people as well. Yes. How that land was, at some point, was being negotiated with Marcus Garvey Back to Africa movement, when again, there's another whole set of phenomena where these journalists are led, great people of Africa have founded the Negro Universal Movement, and Liberia was to be the primary place to start the development of the continent. We see a back end diplomatic pressure being exerted on President King, and then giving up last minute breaking the deal, and then that land is given to Firestone. But the story is the concept of who owns the land, and that's the point when Cole was speaking about Lay's book. Who owns the forest? The question. It boils down to that question: who owns the land? That you can give concession and sit in Monrovia and negotiate the concession, and the concession will go and develop the land and displace the people, and the people's livelihood is destroyed. This was the ownership of land from the day of independence until 2008. It was either government land or private land, right? You know how any other land in Liberia. In 1950, there was a concept, the 1956 public land law. There was a concept of tribal certificate. This certificate is on the part of the Liberian government recognizing again the ownership of indigenous people. And so those who wanted to wanted to purchase land, they needed to go and obtain the tribal certificate from the tribal people who were signed to give their consent. The would-be buyer in obtaining the tribal certificate is indicating his or her intention to live at peace with the tribal people. We can talk about that document. It's very, very conflicting in the way that it was corrupted and how the land rights law is dealing with. Fast forward though, we had a civil war, destroy everything, and everything went helter scatter. We all know the story. After the civil war, Dr. Sawyer, under his administration, the government commission set up to see what would be another cause of war in Liberia. And the number one finding from that study of 2007 and 8 was that if the government doesn't do something about the land business, there will be another war, and the war will be over land, right? In response to that, a land commission is established to be able to develop land policy and land laws. And this is the commission that Corey and I met, and we started to work with the commission to follow things out. Eventually, that led into the development of the land rights law. And then I think I will start here. Let me not just go have some valuable lesson we can learn. Let me maybe Dennis, if we can go back to call to get some statement. We'll come back to your original question about public land, private land, what that is. We can talk about that.
Okay, Cole.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to also recognize the fact that in our own traditional setting, things were not perfect either, right? Because in many of our cultures, and also there's not a cultural hegemony in Liberia. We have different cultures, and I think a lot of times people like to group all native people together and say that all the people that were living in Liberia were somehow the same. We were not the same. We had very distinct. We're similar. We're culturally similar, of course, but there's some distinctions. Like for example, for us in the northern part of Liberia, north and central part of Liberia, everything really, the chiefs, you have strong centralized authority that was in charge of everything. They were in charge of the forest. They were in charge of agriculture. They determined if you kill an animal in the bush and you bring it, the chief determines whether or not the animal is for you, right? Because everything belonged to the strong central authority. So you were given plots of land. People usually work communally on property. It was never a situation where the Dolo household owns this and the Yakwa Willow household owns this. No, it was more of, this is the area that is designated for you to do the work of farming. And I think that people, as society developed, started to misconstrue that as ownership. Oh, my family people used to farm here, so this land is my property. This is now my personal property. And a lot of documents were not available to people. If you had been farming this land for 2 or 3 generations, you did not have a deed, you did not have any legal ownership, then sometime the chief will just come out and give a tribal certificate to somebody for land that you've been working on. So when I was at the Land Commission, one of the projects that I was in charge of was the vetting of some of these conflicts, these tribal certificates that were given out, and trying to look and make sure that they were given out correctly, that all of the parties were consulted, and that it was not some kind of, cash violence situation where somebody gave the chief some kind of $10,000 and everybody said, yeah, the land for that person. So it was challenging. It was challenging because you have a lot of wealthy and powerful people that come from these communities, that were powerful government people that were from, places in born and raised, and then became educated, became powerful, and they themselves will go back and try to take ridiculous amounts of money from their clans. I'm not money. I'm sorry, land from their clans. I'm not going to call names, but it happened. Emmanuel is aware of many, many cases like that, where you have leaders who know the tradition, but they have become educated now, and so they want to go back and take advantage of their kinfolk who are not as educated or as connected or as powerful. And we have that going on a lot in Liberia. So somebody that comes from a particular clan has now gone to school, become a powerful government person. They go and say, I'm going to take this 2,500 acres, whole towns and villages in that 2,500 acres, and they want to own it. And then they come with a travel certificate and they want to have it signed as a deed. So our responsibility was to go in and vet these exercises and say, no, this is ridiculous. You cannot have this amount of land and privatize it. There's people on it. And that work, that vetting of public lands that occurred all over the country was some of the groundwork, the injustice, the selfishness, the greed that comes along with land, class issues, So it's not only an issue of Congo versus native artists. It's about the powerful and the powerless, and those who have resources and those who do not have resources. A lot of time the conflict, the oppressive forces are their own children that went to school, that are coming back, they can't take over, So it's been quite the whole land journey in Liberia, and it's still fragile, even with all of the work that Emmanuel and Stanley Toll and Dr. Brandy and all of these people have done. There's still so much more that needs to happen to sensitize people and to protect their interests.
If I can get at Dennis, if I can get at something very quickly to what Cole said, it's very, very important, and we really want to highlight this: selfishness and greed. We have discussed the encroachment by foreign powers, but at some point we need to look inward and self-criticize and really see who we are. Yes, a lot of people who think they got education will go back to their own villages, to their own people, and really cheat them and corrupt them. Again, as Liberians and as Africans, young professionals, young and old, if we cannot look inward and change our attitude and our behavior and our greed and how we want things to be for us, we'll not grow as a people. It's very, very important. Quite recently, if I can get at that on this platform, there is this information that lawmakers are saying we will create a third lane for lawmakers. Who ever hear about that in the world? The lawmakers going to get a particular link for them. This type of behavior, we see it. And land is political. Of course, we can talk about the land rights law, the version it is in the politics that shaped the way it is looking to today. But even at that, with that type of decision, again, we're talking about land. Where are you laying the third lane? Is on the land, right? So then land is just us. But I wanted to underline that point of selfishness, being greedy, and you're supposed to be working for your people. You tend to work for yourself. We can find another time to talk about it, but let's continue.
And unfortunately, they are entitled to. They're supposed to be making laws, so they make all the laws in their favor. But let's look at the land conflict now, because coming and how does that have its root in what we have discussed earlier? And you made mention of the public land, the private land. I think there's also the customary land. So let's look at all these and look at the land conflicts we have today. To what extent they have their roots in how land was acquired, how the colonial master play a role to what we have today, and even the war.
So, Koha already talked about some. There are many reasons. I want to emphasize the point of the war, and after the 1980 coup, I was not born yet, but I've been told many times by Dr. Brenny, who is a mentor, and a lot of other people, John Gonglo and other people who we look up to. We say giants, right? When we're talking about giants, we talk about moral giants. We're not talking about corrupt giants, right? The names I'm calling are called giants because they have moral authority and I can emulate from them. But one thing that they told me was, you're busy almost for 2 months, play this song. Who owns Papa's land? Right
Yeah.
after the killing of Towel, who is a whole story as a tragedy, and with his killing, we can talk about that. But to play that song throughout, who owns Papa's land? This Nigeria.
That song is by Sonny Okuzu, who owns Papa.
Yes, the music was played for almost 2 months in Liberia. And if you studied that, why is it that the people were rejoicing and playing this particular music over and over? You talk about the land, right? You talk about land because the history has also bordered on a small group of settlers versus majority indigenous oppression in the form of an oligarchy form of government. And the government is finally toppled down in 1980, and this music is a rejoicing song. So we can say that, and with certain level of confidence, that the killing of Togo or the emergence of full-blown civil war is also tied to land, which is the resources of the land and how other people did not benefit as compared to certain people, right? We can talk about that. And in fact, the TRC report clearly stated that as land reform in Liberia, land issue was also a root cause to the civil war. Fast forward, the Lands Commission is established, could already describe the complexity of travel certificate, how it was being abused. The land right law is passed in 2018, signed by President George Weah, and published into handbill on October 10, 2018. What is in that law? Those are some of the questions you're talking about now. If we describe the problem, how the law is addressing the problems, and I don't want us to skip that. If Dennis, if you want me to touch on it right now, I can do that. How the law is dealing with some of the problems that we just
Right.
described.
Let's talk about the problems because we have like 20 minutes. So use that wisely and talk about some of these conflicts, these issues, and how the law, as you say, address those issues.
Well, some of the problems we have now in Liberia today, of course, fraudulent land transaction in city areas, in Maserati particularly, and other areas in Liberia. We have double sale of lands. We have different kinds of land conflict. People left during the war when they went back, their land had been claimed by other people. So there's a law. The Land Commission passed a law. The lawmakers encouraged them to pass a law in 2014-15. It's called the Criminal Conveyance of Land Law. And that law, we're asking Liberians to make use of that law because the law is very powerful to be able to punish land sellers who knowingly know that the land is not for them to sell it, or the sold it, they're reselling it, or the buyers who think that because I have money, I can go and take land from somebody and build a house on it as quickly as possible, or the paramount chief, the district commissioners, or the lawmakers, or the ministers who are involved, they feel that they have a lot of greater influence, or the president, they have greater influence within the Liberian system. They can use that. We have a law called the Criminal Conveyance of Land Law that people can use. Then when it comes to the land rights law, customary land, this is correcting the historical injustice of denying the people who had lived on the land before the establishment of Liberia, customary people, they are given right to their land, right? That's customary land. Private land that people purchase, they have deed for it. For the customary land, they don't have to show deed, they don't have to show any paper. Oral testimonies is an evidence that they own the land. The government cannot give it to anybody again without their consent. Private land, of course, then government land. We say these are land now that government properties are owned, the military barracks or the hospitals that the government itself has developed. Three categories of land. If you subtract all, is there any other land remaining in Liberia? Call that a public land. Is to be used by the government on behalf of the Liberian people. Going forward, we don't expect the Liberian government to sit and give large tract of land into concession without involving those who actually live and use the land.
Wow. And so the public land or the government land, that land is how is that really demarcated? Because I'm thinking outside of Monrovia, in the interior. I mean, where does government have its land? Is this land that maybe nobody lives near there, or where is it? Oh, call one second. I think you are. Go ahead, call.
And so when the counties were becoming fully incorporated, you have to remember some of these areas like Nimba was fully incorporated in 1964. So government land would be municipal areas such as Sanikole, Voinjama. You've got, areas there that the government developed long before the war. Laid out into these are urban areas that belong to central government. There's private deeded land within those areas, but for the most part, the county administrations. There's a huge portion of Montserrado County that belongs to Montserrado County administration. Um, a lot of land on the Somalia Drive side and things like that. Those are government, the police academy, that whole area, that they started to sell. Police officers living on government land started to sell house spots to private citizens when they didn't own the land. That was another conflict that I worked on at the Land Commission. But police academy land, that was government land. It was. But the idea that government land belongs to somebody other than the people, I think, is a little bit flawed. The problem is that all the people don't feel that they are adequately represented by their government. But the concept of public land is not a bad thing in a democracy because it means that we all own it in common. So if Montserrado County administration owns land, it belongs to all of the people of Montserrado. That's in public administration, that's how it's supposed to be viewed. But because of the way Liberia has been mismanaged by leadership in the past, what has been explicitly done with the land reform was necessary. If you look at an 1847 Constitution, Article 14, there's a very important, Article 14 is extremely important. It reads, the purchase of any land by any citizen or citizens from the Aborigines of this country for his or her, or for his or their own use, for the benefit of others, or a state or estates in fee simple shall be considered null and void. The reason that we're doing this is that we're trying to prevent a land grab from indigenous people. Article 14 was put in place to prevent settlers or people who were coming in with resources from purchasing large tracts of land from indigenous people. I sometimes wonder how we digressed and degenerated the way we did. Because if you look at the way the 1847 Constitution was brilliantly written, that Article 14, people misinterpreted it. Oh, they were saying they shouldn't buy land from indigenous people. But if you look at the context of the entire Constitution, it was a protection clause that was being put in place. These people came from North America where they had committed, where their former slave masters had committed mass genocide, massacred the entire population of North America, completely decimated them, and took their land by force. So when they constructed Liberia, the concept of Liberia, they wanted to avert or avoid some of these horrors that happened in North America. They were conscious of it. So Article 14 was a protection clause. Not only can you not go in and buy this land from these people, leave them alone. You cannot go and acquire their land. And it is because of that Article 14 that we even have the ability to discuss customary laws today, customary land today. Because if that was not in place, all of that land that we're talking about today, calling customary land, could have been privatized and deeded to few families of wealthy and powerful people.
Yeah.
So it is important for us to remember that there were at one time, we had been on the right track. Even with all of the fights and the horrors and things that have happened in Liberia, there were some very smart people at different points in our history that put certain things in place to preserve things for us today. Article 14 is why we're even able to have such a thing as customary land in Liberia.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing land ownership in Liberia. And at this time, we'll bring in our viewers with their comments. And we have a lot of them. I don't think we're even going to be able to complete or read all those comments. There are lots of comments. And I mean, I'm so thrilled that people are very, very much interested in what we are discussing and they are talking. So let me start with the first one. The first one here that come from Jackie say the title you have today itself is divisive. The title is land ownership in Liberia. Who owns the land? And Jackie thinks that that is divisive. Jackie, give us more and why you think that is so. And we're talking about it. The first part in the first session of the OAU in 1964, all the member states pledged to respect all the borders that existed upon their independence. The OAU did not want their meetings to be entirely spent on border disputes, so the disputed boundaries have been accepted by all member states. The boundaries now stands. So those lands that were encroached upon, like San Pedro area, the Bo area, and all these ones, like Jackie is saying that we just say, OAU say, well, let's just live with it. Let's live with it. Keller, the Bible was written in Hebrew. I think this was all these borders were created by Europeans. I think my okay question here for you. Please explain why so many people buy large tracts of land and do not develop the land for years, keeping it for their kids who might not return to Liberia. What can the government do about that? Dr. Yuri, that question for you. You can take a start before we proceed.
Well, it depends where the land is located. So if all you buy the farm land somewhere distance, which you can develop it later, but the land right law talks about having land, especially in the city area, where you're not developing, right? If you're not developing that land, it presents some sort of hazard. If doing that, the government can take it from you, right? The government can take it from you using different sort of means. The government can even use not even the land right law. The government can use the public health law, and having an undeveloped parcel in the city for a long time, it presents a nuisance to the
Right.
community. So the public health law can actually be used to be able to take that land from you. But also the land rights law. You're not developing the land for a certain period of time. The government can take it and use it for public goods through eminent domain. It's specified. The government can do that through court action. The government will institute a court action against you. Your land, you have not done anything on it, is causing problem, and then they want to use it for public goods. And then the court can make its judgment to take the
Right.
land from you, provided the government is giving you the fair compensation for it, and you are refusing that, so they can also take it from you. So there are provisions in the land right law to deal with those type of situations, but also in the public health law as well.
Keller Sarase, private land ownership was unknown to Africans. The land belonged to the ancestors. Individual and community use the land as regulated by the king, queen, or chief. Blow J Nation, this is my friend Choppy Charlie. This is a critical problem Liberia faces: the miseducation of so-called natives who have abandoned their own people. Upon returning to the people, will abuse and dupe their rural people. Any call you smiling? You have any comment to make on that?
I just think that's a little extreme, but yeah, I was just surprised at the comment being extreme.
Yeah. Choppy can be very bombastic. Ben say land is a finite resource, thus requires judiciously adjudicated per land transaction. A question here from Jackie again. Do you think fixed term leasehold would be better than freehold? The criminal conveyance law is useless. Is it?
I mean, I don't think the law is useless. I think that our problem is not the laws, it's the enforcement of laws. We have wonderful laws. It's the political will to enforce. So some of these issues lie with law enforcement and the judiciary. You should blame the law because it's not being enforced. I don't think it's the correct way to proceed.
Okay. Dr. Euro, you're saying something, you can unmute yourself. Dr. Yuri, unmute yourself. You are muted. Unmute yourself. All right, go ahead.
So I was saying to Jackie the both issues she raised on the first part of her comment, fixed term lease versus they both exist, and it's just a matter of semantic. A fixed term lease is fixed period, right? Freehold, you use it in perpetuity until you can give it. Both actually exist. It depends what is being negotiated. The second part, I agree with Call to say that that law is not useless. The failure of the Liberian people to make use of the law is what is useless. I did not use the law, but I know a particular instance where somebody have actually used the law and be able to get their land back in Liberia. So some people are trying. The law is very powerful, but it depends how citizens are using it. It depends how the court is interpreting it. If churches are not corrupted in the process.
All right. Ben Ma or Nama say thank very much for sharing the information. Sam Wolo, there needs to be a way to recover the land that was sold by people who confiscated land as a consequence of the war and created fake deeds and ultimately sold it. The people who bought it without doing their due diligence should also be held to account for receiving stolen property. That is how you discourage these kinds of illegal transactions. And before you come in, let's Musu Stewart, can government negotiate acquisition of indigenous land to convert to public use? If yes, does it require the exchange of money?
That last part, the answer is yes. The process is very long because it ought not to be corrupted. So if the government wanted to acquire indigenous land for public use, the government has the right to negotiate. But there's a word inserted in the law. It has to be through free, prior, and informed consent. It's an international word phrase used now in the development context that has a specific criteria as to how you go through a process for it to be certified as free, prior, and informed consent.
Still on the comments and Call, you can come into say the simple tax process could help resolve some of our land difficulties. And Sam Chia is having a recommendation. He said, Dennis, I would like to recommend that we revisit the topic to prepare some of us engage the guests. It is important. That suggestion is granted. Guys, at the end of the show, please or promise me when you can be back, so we can continue on this topic. My people are asking. Jackie Saya said there is a piece of land between Kerry and Benson Street that is a dump site. It is not being developed. Cole, what do we do with that piece of land? Oh, Cole, sorry. Go ahead.
The city of Monrovia has ordinances, right? So there's ordinances that require that if you own a property that you have, keep it up to a certain standard. Those things have been on the books for decades. They're just not enforced. So it's not that you can use your land and just have garbage sitting on your property. It's actually it's illegal, and the city of Monrovia can actually confiscate your property if you allow it to be a dump site or some type of other hazard, or if you have a dilapidated property. During the war and after the war, a lot of these things were relaxed because they said, well, people were under duress, people have been displaced, but it is 2021. There should no longer be tolerance for these things. I mean, the city of Monrovia is a health hazard. It's an environmental hazard. There's children are developing all kinds of health issues. We have asthmatic children, an epidemic of asthma in Monrovia because of the trash and the burning of trash and all of these things. So there's no excuse any longer for us to not enforce rules and regulations and laws that are on the books. It's not that the country is lawless, it's that the laws are not being enforced. And the city mayor can go and literally confiscate your property. If you are given due warning, if they warn you once, you're fined, you don't pay the fine, they can actually take your property from you, clean it up, and auction it off. Those laws are on the books. So if you're a private landowner, you have a lot and somebody is using it to dump trash, if you get fined, you don't pay the fine and clean it up, they can go and auction off your property to somebody who will. And I think those things need to be enforced again. I think a lot of that will solve some of the problems in Monrovia when you start, but the people who own the land are so powerful, right? So
Right.
nobody wants to ruffle those feathers.
Exactly. And again, do people trust the system to even go and sue people to say, well, or maybe that land is public land? Who knows?
Mm-mm. Most
So,
of these are private lots that were abandoned, and the family members are no longer. Either some of the family members, there's a lot of properties in Monrovia that the relatives are living in Liberia, and they just don't bother,
Yeah.
to do anything with it.
Linero boy, you say, I love the discussion because many people's eyes will be open in order to know the truth. We do our best, and that's what you're going to get here at Focus on Liberia to open their eyes. When one purchases land that is, what is the process one has to go through to legitimize the land, given the resale of land by multiple people today? Milta wants to know.
Dennis, let's get through that very quickly and
Yeah.
pay key attention. The land authority has developed six different step processes for you to go through to purchase a land. Let's follow that very quickly. As time go by, we can make the diagram available on Focus on Liberia Facebook page. You can see it. To purchase the land, go and see the land as the first one. Go and see the land. Go and see the physical description of the land. After you see it, ask people around that area what the person who is saying the selling the land, what is actually for them. I want to say from the beginning, purchasing of land is not a rushing thing. Nobody should say do it quick and post something there. It's a red flag. Because you're going to purchase that land, it's going to be for you until you can give it to somebody else. All right. So after you ask people the land, some of the initial steps is really to see the deed. There is an instrument called a mother deed. Let the person show it to you. But you are not a technical person. So it's better to have a registered land surveyor. And what the land authority has also done is has satisfied land surveyors in Liberia and published, I think, their names on their website and the rest of it. Use one of those guys, one of those people. Don't go to any surveyors because those people have been trained. They will look at the deed, they know the history of the area, they will tell you their land is for their family. It's the first thing. All right. Before even you negotiate price. When you negotiate the price, you're going to pay. You have verified, you have done your due diligence to know that the land is actually for the person. You have negotiate the price. In the negotiation, talk about taxes. All right. The person has not paying taxes on our land, and more likely the taxes will fall on you. So let that be part of the negotiation so the price can be lower. Because when you go register that land, you will pay some taxes towards that. Right? After that, and the surveyor will survey your land. Be careful. The one who is selling the land should not be the one to say, I bring him a surveyor. Because in most instances, they connive with the surveyors and dupe you. So it's better to get your own surveyors and go to the Liberia Land Authority. Ask about registered land surveyors. They will show you who they are. Let one of those be the one to survey the land. There's a whole process after that. The deed is signed. You pay for the money. The lawyer going to take it to the probate court, where the court itself going to put it up to say we're going to probate this land, right, for a certain period of time as a public announcement. After that, if it is probated, you go back to the land authority. It's $25 to register your land, so that your land document is kept in the archive. Whenever there is a problem, you can go there and retrieve it. And that is a legitimate document in the hands of the government recognizing your ownership of the land. Bottom line, do never rush to buy a land. It will take a whole long process. Don't buy a land in 1 week. Estimate 1 month to 3 month period before you can finish the whole process. Don't do it in 1 week. It's not possible.
Thank you. Those who say great information on land purchase, too many people are being duped in the procurement process. Let's run through these comments quickly, and then I'll be asking for your closing comments. Dennis SK Kake, I'm always impressed listening to programs on your show. I recommend that you please invite some legal people to discuss the issue of bond fees that are being collected from our people by judges from justices of the peace to the Supreme Court. I believe that those monies are supposed to be paid to the government revenue and receipt. Thank you. We're going to take that into advisement. Franklin Roosevelt, so he's right to say that the law is useless. Why will you have a law that is not enforced? So that's another way of looking at it. Alson Saba, if an ownership of a large land size, say 100 acres and a tax about $2, most people begin selling, which could help in bringing more in property revenues. However, if public works implement the kinds of homes being built, that will increase the revenue and bring about more development. Mavis J. Weir, do we have a proactive spatial data infrastructure and cadastral, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, systems by the land commissioner to get more information on the land in Liberia? Uh, Mosu, if marketable minerals are discovered on indigenous land, who has the authority to negotiate exploration, government or the owners? I have gold right behind my village in Dodoken. Who benefits?
The government owns everything under the ground.
So everything for me.
There's a caveat. There's a caveat to that. I agree with 100% with Cole. The Constitution gave mineral rights to the government of Liberia to use on behalf of every Liberian. What we have seen also is that corrupt people in the government have also been using the resources for their own benefit at the detriment of majority Liberians. We were successful in negotiating a clause in the land rights law that protects against that. Since the mineral right belongs to the government, but before you get to the mineral, you will clear the surface of the land, and then the land will be degraded. That when we introduce the word, before the government can get the land, they should use the process of free, prior, and informed consent. And meaning the people who occupy the land will negotiate successfully and gain their own interest at their free will before. Anything contrary to that is against the law.
And I also want to add, and this is very important, Liberia is a democracy. And in a democracy, the government is not supposed to be something different from yourself. These are supposed to be your people that are governing your resources, both your taxes, your mineral resources, and everything else. Until Liberian citizens realize that they are selecting their own people to be the government and select their best and brightest instead of the hustlers that they continue to select, we're going to continue to have these problems. You know, how can you be in a democracy and be in a conflict with the people that you have sent to work in your interests? It is because you are selecting the wrong people to go and work for you. The government is not supposed to be some boogeyman. We're not occupied by foreign powers. We're not colonized by the French. Our representatives, our senators, our president, our vice president, these are people that we as citizens have empowered. So the idea that we have to even think that we must protect ourselves from ourselves is a testament to how irresponsible we are as voters in the selection process for our leaders. And we need to understand how much power we're giving these people and what they need to know and understand in order to do their jobs correctly. These are very technical, powerful, and technical responsibilities that your elected officials have. If they are not educated, if they do not read, if they do not understand how the world works, if they do not have your interests at heart, if they do not know what they do not know, they cannot help you. Stop electing people who do not have the ability to perform the tasks that those positions require them to perform. You cannot take somebody who was hustling in the community, and yes, he was a nice guy when he was hustling, he was selling his drugs, he used to help pay school fees, and send him to one of the highest offices in the land and expect something good to come out of it. He is not capable. And until Liberian people understand that and start to select leaders that are capable, you got to say, oh, the person corrupt. Corruption is also ineptitude. Ineptitude and inability is also a sure way to corrupt a process. If you have no idea what you are doing, you will never get it done. You're no different from the guy who goes there to steal. And I will just leave it at that.
Yes, and you are exactly correct. Sam Wallow is agreeing with you, and I like when you say protecting ourselves against ourselves, or sometimes protecting ourselves from the people that we have elected to protect us.
It's us, yeah.
Sam Chiese always bringing educative topic to the people. So that's a kudos there. Our last comment here come from Choppy Charlie Blue Jay Nation is fighting back at me here. He said, "Check, my man Dennis putting me on blast has bombastic. It is painful when you consider the loud noise from many of our friends who engages in this tribal bigotry by preaching native versus conquer politics or American liberal politics. The fact is, these are the same folks who left those villages, acquire Western education, and instead of helping our people, they brand poor villagers as witches, etc. Why should a person possess rich land yet they are very poor? No government ever in the history of Liberia has. So thank you again. Promise me you're coming back because we got to do this again, my people. Our audience here, they want more, and they think that one of them suggested that hey, we want to participate. Okay. And then Jackie is saying something. Said there are 39% listening to this informative show. Tabloid and atrocious Liberian shows draw 1,000 Liberians. We leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time. And let me give you each of you 49 seconds to make your closing remarks, and we'll call it a day. Let me start with Dr. Uri.
Thank you, Dennis. I want to pick up from Jackie's point of view there about the listening audience. Those who are listening will say thank you very much for doing that. And the 1,000 or 2,000, 3,000 people that listen to oral sensitive, sensational shows, they can go ahead and do it. But this is exactly the point. The point is the country has already become politicized in a very negative way. That if you're not talking, cursing, saying all kinds of things that don't make loud mouth, that don't make sense, people don't listen to you. I want to congratulate you. Focus on Liberia. I follow the show most of the time as well. This education matters until Liberians, especially young Liberians, and young Africans as a whole, until they can sit back and listen and talk with some of the things that Jackie was talking about on the show, the philosophy of Edward Wilmot Blading, with his ambition for Africa, for the Africans to study and develop themselves and know that we are not less of a human being. We are full human being with brain and we are intellectuals. We have to recognize that and make use of it. We can only do that when we fundamentally change ourselves. We can only do that if we are aspiring to become public servants. We're going to do it in the interest of the people, not without going there with ulterior motive. When we get there, we'll 4 hours storming first before we can see about anything. It's not going to work. And again, self-criticism, this has been the pattern, and then we'll have to change. But focus on Liberia, continue to bring people to educate us. Those who are listening will listen, and little by little, we'll change ourselves, and then we'll change our country. Thank you.
Amanda. Call, 35 seconds. Oh, I gave 49 seconds.
I want to thank the people that are listening, and I want to thank Dr. Uri and you, Dennis, for your continued efforts. Dr. Uri, I look forward to seeing much of the great things that you have in your future. I am not only your friend, but a fan. Dennis, you keep giving this platform to a lot of our best and our brightest. This gives us hope in our country, and it reminds us that we are not a den of mediocrity. We have groomed excellent minds, great thinkers. This is not the lost generation. It is the generation that has, produced, chemists like Saki Golafale and people like these. Dr. Adam Dole. We've got geniuses, Dr. Dolo, the neurosurgeon in Liberia. We've got scientists, we've got thinkers, brilliant minds. Thank you for showcasing them, Dennis, and continue to do so. your audience will grow and it will be the correct people that will watch. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And on top of the hour, I'm invited on Liberia Public Radio. They want me to talk about everywhere what we do here and what the philosophy, what the program, and all the things that we do. And we're going to talk a little bit of politics too, you know. But thank you so much for joining us. We want to thank our audience and want to thank all of you, even those who watching now and those that will watch later on YouTube. Continue to follow us on Facebook, also on YouTube, Twitter, and all social media platforms. At Focus on Liberia, we do our best to educate, to elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We are trying to link with some radio stations. It requires money. We are linking with them in Monrovia to carry these informative shows in Monrovia and throughout Liberia as well. And so hopefully in a week or two, someone has already paid for 2 months for us to be on the air in Monrovia. And so our hands are open for more gestures like that so that we can continue to inform. We have grown now to a place that we want to extend to Liberia so that people in Liberia can benefit. Those who don't have radio stations that are in Memphis or that are in Sibican, they can also tune into their radio and listen to this. I want to thank you all. Until then, from me to you, I say thank you so much for watching. On behalf of all of us here at Focus on Liberia, I want to remind you that we are all Liberians. Good night. God bless.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home.